If you are interested in buying a lever gun, the first question you always have to ask yourself is, what do I want to use it for? This will help you answer other important questions like what caliber is right for you and what features do or don't matter to you. If you want a gun that's just for fun, a 22 or 357 Magnum rifle is a bit better for this, because less expensive ammunition gives you more of an opportunity to shoot more and enjoy your gun. If you are going to use a gun for hunting medium or large game, an actual rifle caliber like 45-70 and 30-30 are better cartridges because they have better range than handgun rounds and they have fairly good ammunition availability. 405 Winchester and 50-110 Winchester are pretty impressive cartridges, but they aren't nearly as common, which means that the ammunition availability is pretty poor. However, 30-30 and 45-70 are still limited in range. Calibers like 308, 6.5 Creedmoor, and 30-06 are definitely more practical if you are in wide open spaces as opposed to hunting in thick brush and timber. However, many Midwestern states will limit you to straight wall cartridges for deer hunting out of what I would call misplaced good intentions, so calibers like 357 Magnum, 44 Magnum, and 45-70 are better in this situation. If you just want a gun for aesthetic appeal, for example to hang on the wall of your living room, the ability to mount a scope on it may not be as important. In fact, a bulky scope may detract from the aesthetic value. The one thing that I won't talk about is using lever guns for self-defense. The reason for this is because there really isn't that much information out there on what ammunition has enough penetration but won't over-penetrate, and I feel that this is a really crucial part of the self-defense discussion. I'm also going to talk about using lever actions as bear guns once I've covered some of the comparisons and common features. We have to keep in mind that lever guns have some limitations though. They generally have more screws than other designs, and when a screw backs out just a little in a crucial place, this can be very annoying, or in a life or death situation, a huge problem. A fairly common example of this is the screw on the right side of the receiver that holds the loading gate in place. Over time, this screw can come loose, causing the loading gate to also get loose and jam up the action. As far as I know, this can happen with most any lever gun, which means making sure the screws stay snug is very important. Since lever guns are based off of old designs, many of them have a front sight that is tightly fitted into a groove. This means that if you want to adjust windage much, you have to give a gentle tap on one side of the sight base with something that won't damage the finish or metal, like the plastic handle of a screwdriver. A friend of mine has considerably greater personal experience with lever actions than I do. He said that he would avoid the 1873 Winchester rifles due to inherently weaker actions. So if you were to use Hot Plus P ammunition in them, that would be a bad idea. The Winchester 1894, 1895, and copies of them have very strong actions in comparison. He also explained that lever actions or any other tube magazine-fed rifle are inherently more complex and more unreliable than a bolt action, for example. Lever actions that feed from a box magazine, like the Henry Long Ranger, Browning BLR, or Winchester 1895, simply don't have that complexity. However, lever actions with tube magazines generally have significantly more capacity than bolt actions. Levers also have the benefit that they are faster to fire rapidly than a bolt gun. This is because your hand doesn't have to leave the lever to reach the trigger. This attribute of faster fire is a significant advantage for hunting dangerous game and for general defense against such animals. Lever actions have been made for powerful calibers like the 405 Winchester, and yet no one has made a box magazine-fed lever action in 375 H&H, which would be good for both bear hunting and hunting dangerous African game in countries that have an arbitrary minimum caliber requirement of 375 H&H. Such a rifle could hold more rounds and shoot faster than any bolt actions currently available in the same caliber. While I'm talking about the strength of actions, I want to mention the 3 different pressure levels of ammunition that are made for 45-70 rifles. The weakest loads are made for the weak action of the 1873 Springfield. 1876 Winchester and 1895 Marlin rifles are strong enough to handle a step up in power. However, the strongest actions are the single-shot Ruger No. 1 and No. 3 rifles, which allows the use of the most powerful loads. Buffalo Bore's website also has a list of all the different 45-70 rifles that are strong enough to handle their hottest loads. It includes Siamese Mauser bolt actions, which is a fairly interesting thing since 45-70 is almost exclusively used in lever action or single-shot rifles. The Winchester 94 is lighter and has thinner wood stock and forend than most other designs. Winchesters are top ejecting, and excepting the 1895, they are side-loading. The 1895 is an interesting rifle. It can be bought in 30-06 and the very powerful 405 Winchester. Winchesters today are made in Japan and they are fairly high quality. The 94 is available in 30-30 and less common calibers. The 94 carbine is not drilled and tapped for a scope, but other models of it are. Putting a scope on the 94 is generally not a good idea because you need to have a scope mount that is high enough and does not interfere with ejection. I personally would not get this rifle if I wanted to put a scope on it. 1886 Winchester rifles are available in 45-70 and less common calibers, and none of them come tapped for scopes. The 94s made today come with a tang safety sort of like a Mossberg shotgun does. They also have a grip safety, which means that you can't pull the trigger without gripping the lever to the stock. Winchesters do not come with sling studs either, which can be a bit of a disappointment for the people who are going to carry the rifle a lot. Compared to the Winchester 94, the Marlin 336 and 1895 have fewer parts, better trigger, and the bolt can be removed. This is important because you don't have to clean the barrel through the muzzle like you do with the Winchester 94. The Marlins also have a more modern cylinder bolt design and have a safety on the side of the receiver. They are also side ejecting and side loading. Marlins made during Remington ownership are generally not good quality, but the ones made today are very good. The Marlin SBL, Dark Series, and Trapper Series come with aperture sights. The SBL and Dark Series have Picatinny rail on top for very easy optics mounting. They come with a fiber optic and tritium front sight, which is good for both bright light and in dim light if your eyesight isn't so good. The Dark Series is their tactical theme rifles, and they can be had in 30-30 and 45-70. Both are 5+1 capacity and have 16-inch barrels. The Dark Series also come with a removable cheek riser because the assumption is that you are going to use optics. The SBL series is made to resist elements better with stainless steel metal and gray laminate stocks. SBLs are available in 30-30 and 45-70 with 19-inch barrels and 6+1 capacity. They also make a 44 Magnum/44 special gun in this style with 8 or 9 rounds of mag capacity depending on what rounds you are using. Carl Carsata of InRange TV really emphasizes that guns built off the Winchester design are better. He also says that the Uberti rifles are not compatible with the Winchesters that they are based off of. More people are using Ubertis, so there is more aftermarket support. He says that the 1886 Winchesters are harder to field strip due to the fact that you have to remove both the lever screw and the side plate screw, which will then cause all the parts to fall out at once. They can also fire out of battery if you accidentally pull the trigger before closing the action completely. In comparison, the 1873 has the out-of-battery safety and is easier to disassemble. He dislikes the Henry USA rifles because they use cast and MIM parts. MIM is metal injection molding, by the way. He has also seen a Henry malfunction so bad that he could not figure out how to clear it even though he had a complete toolkit. Since I don't know the details of this case, I can't really talk about it other than the fact that it could be a one-off occurrence. He says that the Marlin actions don't control a round very effectively once it leaves the magazine tube, and that if you are running a Marlin very fast or short stroke it a little, the round will be loose in the action, which means that you could potentially cause a double feed. I have a good deal of respect for Carl here, but I would not be so quick to dismiss Marlins as being unreliable, and I'll give you an explanation why. But first I want to mention Carl's conclusion, which is that most people should get a Rossi R92 and 357 Magnum/38 Special, because the gun is cheap, well made, and the ammunition can be cheap as well. Carl refers to the so-called Marlin Jam, which is a double feed with a round loose in the action and a round stuck halfway out of the magazine tube. The immediate fix for this is to shake the loose round out of the action and take something like a wood pencil or a chopstick and push the stuck round back into the magazine tube. I see this as somewhat unfair to call this double feed the Marlin jam, as it seems to be caused by using ammunition that is too short in length to function right. This person had to use dummy rounds in .44 Russian to demonstrate a jam in a .44 Magnum rifle. If there was a significant problem with most rifles, he would not have to resort to using incorrect, shorter ammunition to demonstrate it. Carl himself also admits that all lever guns are sensitive to overall length, so I don't think we should be particularly hard on Marlins for not cycling short ammunition that other guns probably would not cycle either. So if the question is there anything inherently wrong with the Marlin design, I think the answer is largely no. If there was a significant problem, they wouldn't have sold so many rifles. This seems to be a problem that only happens rarely to some people. If the so-called Marlin jam is happening somewhat regularly in a specific gun, that's a sign that something is worn and needs to be replaced. For example, replacing the worn shell lifter solved the problem in the case I'm showing here. Similar infrequent jams involving a round stuck partially in the mag tube also happen with Henry guns. If the same problem happens to a Henry rifle, are you still going to call it a Marlin jam? Judging from one person's experience at a gun shop dealing with Marlin guns, either short stroking the lever or problems with too short ammunition only caused 5% of the problems with Marlins. Most of the time, it was either a lack of cleaning, lack of lubrication, or a damaged lifter that was causing the problems. Some Henrys are tube loading, which means that you slide off the magazine tube itself before dropping the rounds into the gun. Some Henrys can be fed from both the side of the receiver and from the tube. Model X Henrys come with front and rear fiber optic sights, which are pretty nice. Henrys are side ejecting, and most come tapped for scopes. However, only 2 rifles actually come with a Picatinny rail already installed for optics. That is the Long Ranger chambered in .556 and the all-weather Picatinny rail model in .4570. As far as I know, all the other guns, you have to buy a rail separately for optics mounting, and in my opinion, this puts them at a bit of a disadvantage when other companies have Picatinny rail already installed. Also, if the lever is knocked open a little on a Henry rifle when you walk through brush, you can't just close it again. You have to cycle the action and inject the round inside. The box magazine-fed rifles like the Browning BLR and Henry Long Ranger are a whole different ballgame. They are more accurate because they have concentric locking lugs and they don't have a tube magazine affecting the barrel harmonics. Tube-fed magazines obviously change the overall weight of the rifle and where the weight is distributed with every shot. They also have a longer practical range because they allow the use of pointed Spitzer bullets that give better ballistic coefficient. The BLR and the Long Ranger are pretty similar. Both have detachable box magazines and 4+1 capacity in .308 rifles. The Long Ranger is half a pound heavier and has a 1 in 10 twist rate compared to the 1 in 12 twist rate for the Browning. I really don't know why the BLR is geared towards using lighter bullets in the 110 to 190 grain range, as opposed to the Henry, which is geared towards the 150 to 230 grain range. Perhaps the assumption is made that people will be using BLRs for deer hunting with lighter bullets instead of using heavier bullets on larger animals like elk. The 6.5 Creedmoors of each kind of rifle have a 1 in 8 twist rate. I should also mention that the BLR is available in .30-06, while the Henry is not. The BLRs also used to be made in larger calibers like 300 Win Mag if you are able to find one on the used market. The Henry Long Ranger mag release is probably a bit better because it is a large button on the side of the receiver instead of a lever under the rifle. The 1895 Winchester is similar to both of these rifles since it feeds from box magazine and is drilled and tapped for a scope mount, but the problem with it is that it ejects through the top. As mentioned before, this causes problems for someone who would want to put a scope on the rifle. Better accuracy, reliability, and the ability to use more pointed aerodynamic bullets and longer practical range with calibers like .308 is why I believe that the BLR and the Henry Long Ranger are, generally speaking, the best lever actions overall for hunting. Other attempts to modernize lever guns with M-LOK handguards and better sights are undoubtedly nice, but I believe a truly modernized lever gun has to have a box magazine and concentric locking lugs in order to truly compete with bolt actions, and not be relegated to the market for people who already like lever guns. The Smith & Wesson Model 1854 has a higher comb height, which seems to be intended to put your cheek at the height for a scope and not iron sights. It is side-loading and side-ejecting. The tube can be removed to empty all the rounds at once without cycling them through the action. Even though you can remove the tube, you are not supposed to try to load rounds into it. Just like the Marlin, it is very well made and probably has the nicest and lightest trigger that you can get from a factory lever action. However, they are only currently available in 45 Colt and 44 Magnum. The Rossi R95 has side loading and side ejection and a Marlin style receiver safety. I believe it is called the R95 because it is based off the Marlin 1895 action. The Rossi R92 is based off the Winchester 1892 design, but has the addition of a strangely small safety on the top of the rifle's receiver. It probably only exists for legal reasons and may be ignored or forgotten by most people. Many of the R92s come with buckhorn rear sights and brass front sight beads. Interestingly, there are only 3 models that come with aperture sights: the triple black guns in 357 Magnum and 44 Magnum, and the stainless steel model in 357 Magnum. All 3 of these guns come with Picatinny rail mounted over the handguard, which will allow you to have something like a red dot or a scout scope. There are also only 2 R92s that have sling studs: the stainless and hardwood model in 454 Casull and the triple black tactical themed model in 357 Magnum. All of the Rossi R95s come with sling studs and are chambered in either 30-30 or 45-70. They do not make a stainless steel gun in 45-70, only 30-30. I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that all the R95s that do not come with a Picatinny rail are drilled and tapped. The website doesn't seem to mention this, but you can see it in some of their pictures on the website. I also want to mention that at one point Rossi did make a stainless steel 45-70 model, but you're probably not going to find one for sale anywhere. The 1873 Ubertis are only chambered in 357 Magnum and 45 Colt. The 1886 Ubertis are chambered in 45-70, 8+1 or 3+1 capacity depending on what you buy, and both are pretty expensive, though I don't know why you would want to buy one because an actual Winchester 1886 can be bought for cheaper. 1886 Peter Soleys are side feed top eject. They are also more on the expensive end. The 86/71 is much more modernized and can be bought with synthetic stocks and tank safeties. The 86/71 drop tine is in 30-30 and the bore buster is in 45-70. The only 2 86/71 rifles that have a good sight radius is the bore buster Shadow and the drop tine Classic 30-30. The others have the rear sights mounted on the very front of the Picatinny rail that is intended to be for a scout scope. Stocks are available that allow you to adjust the comb height so you can use both the irons and a scope. Personally, I think that feature is a pretty good one. Before I get to the part about bear guns, I want to mention one last thing. A rifle that has a burr on the edge of its lever can damage the shell carrier over time and eventually seize up the rifle from the amount of damage that has been caused. It takes very little effort to check the edge of the lever shown here and take off the burr to prevent a lot of frustration down the road. Historically speaking, the more powerful 405 Winchester was preferred over the 45-70 for bear hunting. There were other powerful cartridges like the 50-110 that were used for bears as well, which would obviously lead people to ask, why isn't everyone buying 405 Winchesters instead of 45-70s for bear defense? There are at least 2 major reasons. The 405 Winchester rounds were considerably more expensive than the 45-70s, and higher costs of course limits the popularity and the amount of use a cartridge sees. Also, the 4570 was powerful enough that no one could doubt its ability to take any animal in North America. The 405 Winchester also had more bullet drop than other calibers, which means that it had overall less versatility and consequently less use among some people. If you intend to use a lever action specifically for bear defense, a 4570 with an aperture sight is the most practical choice in my opinion. The aperture sight is probably just a bit faster to use and a bit more intuitive than standard semi-buckhorn sights. I would also prefer a fiber optic front sight that is protected by a shroud or posts. The Marlin guide gun is the only rifle that I know of that is both chambered in 4570 and has a shrouded front sight. A durable red dot that has enough battery life to be left on all the time is also unquestionably faster than iron sights. Ideally, I want to have a fiber optic front sight with a cutaway sight hood to both protect it and let in light for the fiber optic to work well. I've seen people selling standard TrueGlow 3/8 inch dovetail fiber optic sights and saying specifically that they can be used on Marlins. So if you have a guide gun, you could potentially buy a .343 inch TrueGlow front sight and a cutaway front sight hood for the setup. The problem that remains though is that the Marlin guide gun is blued. For me personally, bluing is not enough protection for serious use. At the very least, I would want a parkerized, aka phosphated finish. So what I would ideally want could only be attained by taking a stainless SBL Marlin and putting a new front sight on it that has the notch for the front sight hood. I'm not even saying that this would be absolutely necessary, as the SBL fiber optic front sight is probably durable for most use. What I am saying is that there is a reason that military rifles and dangerous game rifles tend to have protected front sights, because if your front sight gets knocked off a little when your life is on the line, the consequences could be disastrous. Carrying a weapon day in and day out obviously subjects that weapon to wear. This is why I would highly recommend that you choose a stainless steel and synthetic stock, because wood and blued steel don't stand up too well to moisture and wear. The all-weather Henry in 4570 has a hard chrome finish, wood stock, and 4+1 capacity. The Marlin Trapper with the polymer Magpul stock has a stainless steel finish and 5+1 capacity. I prefer the Marlin overall for several reasons. The extra capacity, including what you can put in the stock, synthetic stock, larger loop on the lever, shorter and adjustable length of pull. The adjustable length of pull probably doesn't matter as much for other people, but for me and how I hold a rifle, it matters quite a lot. When I compare the price of both of these rifles on the same website, the Marlin is about $1,200 and the Henry is about $1,000, but both are sold out. Cost and availability will vary obviously, but the Rossies seem to be more available and are definitely cheaper at around $800, at least on this website. If you want a 4570 and the all-weather features are not as important to you, I would recommend a Rossi R95 because it's cheaper. Of all of the weapons that we could use for bear defense, is the lever action the best though? At the very high end of power for both 12 gauge and 4570, there is little difference. The Brennecke Opal Magnum and the Buffalo Bore 380 grain mono metal rounds are the ones that I'm talking about. They both have roughly 3,800 foot-pounds of energy. We can of course use common ammunition with more comfortable recoil, as well as guns with shorter barrels for a handier package. However, a lever-action 4570 is manually operated and struggles to compete in the speed category with a semi-auto shotgun. One could make the argument that the 4570 is probably more accurate with slugs, and I would say that that may be true, but it also depends on the guns and the ammunition involved. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds with this argument of speed by comparing recoil levels and talking about muzzle brakes. The point is that many people use power, fast handling, and fast shooting as reasons why a 4570 is the best gun for bear defense. However, a semi-auto shotgun can either meet or exceed all of these attributes and still have the advantage of a significantly larger bullet diameter. Greg Boddington surveyed a number of hunting guides, and this chart shows what calibers that they personally use for game. Bears are on the far right side of the chart, and 4570 isn't on this list because none of the guides Boddington surveyed actually use it for bear, or any other game for that matter. Since the font is kind of small due to the size of the chart, I'll mention that the most popular calibers that the bear guides personally use are 30-06, 300 Win Mag, 338 Win Mag, and 375 H&H. I don't doubt that some guides do use 4570s, but from the numbers we have here, they are clearly in the minority. This is a similar chart made with the calibers that guides would recommend their clients carry for bear. The most recommended calibers are 30-06, 300 Win Mag, 300 Weatherby Mag, and 338 Win Mag. I should also mention that the 270 Winchester was almost recommended as much as the 375 H&H. Some people may hear that statement and be astonished or outraged. Here's the thing though, I believe that the reason the 375 H&H isn't more recommended is because most people do not shoot it well with the amount of recoil it has. I'm not sure exactly why the 270 was recommended. Perhaps those guides were talking about just black bears, or perhaps they did not have a well thought out rationale for such a recommendation. Anyway, Tyler Kuhn is a bear guide, and he gives us some tips on what makes a good bear gun. He generally recommends a caliber that is 300 Win Mag or more. He personally uses a Ruger M77 and 338 Win Mag in the all-weather configuration. He started using stainless steel guns exclusively after a situation where his non-stainless rifle rusted and stopped working on a hunt, causing him to have to grab his client's gun instead. He prefers bullets that have 90% or more weight retention because they give more room for error if the shot isn't so good and goes through a shoulder blade. High weight retention bullets, all copper or bonded, for example, will go right through a shoulder and keep going. Since he has to go into thick brush sometimes to recover wounded bears, he has a scope that goes down to 2 power. He also prefers calibers and scopes that allow him to make shots at greater distances, say 400 or 500 yards, at fleeing bears. A guide has 2 major responsibilities: recover the animal and protect the clients. A rifle without long-range capability may only allow the guide to do one of those things well, the protect the clients part. Obviously, not every wounded bear situation requires you to make a long-range shot, because it may run out of sight into thick brush. Bears are pretty smart after all. The point is that you would be better served having a long-range capability in case you need it than needing it and not having it. I've mentioned in other videos that a bullet with really high velocity at close range has less penetration than the same bullet at lower velocity. Given Tyler Kuhn's experience, it would appear that a 300 Win Mag with high weight retention bullets is not a significant disadvantage at close range, even if it has pretty high velocity. It is my opinion that the best bear rifle would be semi-auto and chambered in a caliber that would still ensure effectiveness even at longer ranges. So let's take Tyler's advice and start looking for one chambered in 300 Win Mag. The semi-auto action is important for 2 reasons. It cycles faster than a manual action, and it takes operator error out of the equation, so you can't accidentally short stroke it due to high stress. This may or may not be common knowledge depending on who you talk to, but lever actions are easier for the user to inadvertently jam under stress than bolt actions. The same is true for many pump-action shotguns because they operate in a very similar manner with a shell-lifting device and tube-fed magazine. Short-stroking shotguns under stress is also a significant concern, which is one of the reasons I and other people prefer semi-autos. You can buy a Browning BAR in 300 Win Mag, but they only come with 3+1 capacity. The capacity problem would be worse if they didn't use detachable box magazines, but the point still stands that it would be better to have more rounds. There are BARs that come with larger magazines, but they only come in 308. The BARs that come with standard magazines are built in such a way that even if a company made larger magazines in 300 Win Mag, they still would not work without modification. There are some 300 Win Mags based off the AR-10 design. However, they are fairly heavy and come with long 24-inch barrels. A more compact and lighter rifle is made by Nemo Arms, but it costs thousands of dollars. One of my subscribers mentioned that people in his area have been using 303 Savage and 308 rifles on polar bears with 0 issues. Across history, people have used calibers similar to 308, like 303 British and 303 Savage on bears, and for elephants for that matter. I've done a lot of reading about what people used to use, and unfortunately sometimes what guns were found on people when they were killed by a bear. I have yet to find a case where someone was killed by a bear solely because they chose to use a .308 or similar caliber. However, we should remember that that is a high standard to meet as far as evidence goes. It is much easier to point to examples where a particular caliber was lacking and could have resulted in death if things had gone differently. This part isn't about the .308 Winchester, but rather the .30-30 Winchester, and the example we have here is the grizzly that was called Old Clubfoot. It was 1,600 pounds and was shot 12 times with the .30-30. Only one of those rounds passed through the 5 to 6 inch thick fat and made it into the body cavity itself. The last shot had a somewhat easier path due to the fact that it landed right under an ear. Clearly, these early 1900s era .30-30 soft points did not have enough penetration, and the answer why that happened is not impossible to try to explain. Back then, people didn't put nearly as much testing and research into a bullet as we do today. Nobody was using ballistics gel back then, so the only way that they could tell if a given bullet was failing was in situations like these. However, people at this time blamed the caliber instead of the bullet design because the idea at the time was that bigger is always better. Anyway, it's entirely possible that these rounds had some sort of jacket failure that led to underpenetration. The .30-30 cartridge itself was probably not as fault, as at least one person in this era killed a lot of bears with the .30-30. I obviously don't think it is a particularly good bear cartridge though. Other people take bears and moose with .223s, even though that's not really the best idea. A light AR-10 isn't the best weapon in terms of power or range, but it does have considerable capacity. When it comes down to it though, whatever weapon you decide to use, just make sure that you are very familiar with it and you have it loaded with high weight retention ammunition and that you can shoot it well. The only other thing that I want to add is that scopes with exposed turrets, aka target turrets, have no place on a hunt. They will inevitably get accidentally turned and your shots won't go where you want them to. People who come from a target shooting perspective feel the need to take what they already know and are familiar with and directly apply that to hunting. This is very understandable, but it leads to some problems like the exposed turret issue. After I spent a lot of time making this video, I learned some new information. First of all, I found a survey of prominent big game hunters and the calibers they used in an issue of Outdoor Life published in the early 1900s. When we look at this list, we can find .45-90 mentioned a few times, but not .45-70. At this point, smokeless powder and jacketed ammunition was pushing aside black powder and older calibers. This was despite the fact that copper-nickel jacketed bullets were still being used at the time. Copper-nickel was a problem because it would leave fouling in the barrel if it wasn't cleaned out with ammonia. .45-70's popularity seems to be a more recent trend than most people would realize. I would also say that if past popularity is what directly causes present popularity, then we would see a lot more guns chambered in .44-40. I should also say that the modern .45-70s that are sold today are what people back then would refer to as .45-70 high velocity, given that they are intended to be used with high velocity loadings of smokeless powder. I also talked with another friend about lever guns for bears, and he gave some very good practical information. When I asked him about comparing a .45-70 versus a shotgun, he said that if a bear charges you from a longer range, you can get rounds into it before it gets inside shotgun range. Shotguns also should have their shells sealed to prevent water from getting inside and making them useless. He explained that wooden stocks will swell or shrink with humidity changes, which changes the barrel harmonics and consequently the point of your zero. Obviously, he also prefers synthetic stocks and stainless steel barrels. He said that he boiled his wood stock in wax so that it could not possibly absorb any water at all. I would feel really bad doing that to a new rifle, and you probably would too. So we have about two options. The first being buying a second-hand wood stocks or second-hand gun that has already seen a good amount of use, which we could then waterproof with a bit of a more refined technique. That would involve sanding and multiple layers of polyethylene for maximum water resistance. The second option would be to buy a synthetic stock and fore-end or buy a rifle that already has those things. The Tactical Model X Henry has a synthetic stock but blued finish, which means that you'd be better off buying a Model X stock and fore-end and putting it on the all-weather 4570 model. There is also the Marlin Trapper with the Magpul ELG stock that I mentioned before. Either of these options, depending on your preference, would be good. Also, laminated stocks are better than regular wood. However, laminated flooring can get ruined with flooding, and the same principle applies to laminated stocks. My friend also says that he doesn't like regular aperture sights because the top of the aperture ring blocks some of your vision where open sights would not. From a purely logical perspective, he is entirely right, yet it is hard to quantify and show how large this advantage is without images and possibly numbers. He prefers a very fine front sight and buckhorn sights and would recommend others use this setup. He also doesn't like large lever loops because he says they increase lock time for most people that have regular sized hands. These sort of things will depend on the personal preference and the use of the individual. I don't have enough experience to have strong opinions about aperture sights or large loop levers. But I will say that I've noticed if someone is working a lever as fast as they can, and they don't have their knuckles all the way inside the lever, their hand will slip out of a smaller lever where it wouldn't with a larger lever. I will also say that I hear people talk about how they can't use open sights as well as they used to because their eyes are getting old, and that's why they switched to aperture sights. I'm Info Gunvault. I'm known for my articulate, detailed, and analytical approach. I dispel myths, talk about how you can avoid being attacked by angry bears, and I cover many gun-related topics. I've done a great deal of research for my videos, which is why I have hundreds of pages of notes and quotations. I'd like you to come along for the ride with me in my relentless pursuit of the truth.